I have my favorite books, but then I also have books that just mean a little bit more to me. Hey everyone, welcome back to Andrew's Wizardly Reads, and today, guys, we are going over a list of books that have a lot of special meaning to me as a reader, personally. Before we get into that, please do me a favor and like this video and subscribe to the channel, as it does help the channel grow. You can check the description box down below for links to all of my social media, including the book club / Patreon, which you can join for as little as $1 a month. We've got the great community Discord link there as well, if you are so inclined to join there. And with that out of the way, let's dive right on into my personal list. And as we're going through my list, I also want you to be thinking about your personal list of books that have a little bit of extra special meaning to you as a reader. Those books that were formative, those books that you have very conscious, special, distinct memories of reading these books and having these experiences that kind of form you as a reader. Like, they just kind of stick out in your mind a little bit. For me personally, I've got two that are currently packed away as I am currently moving. The two that I'm going to mention here are, of course, The Hobbit and The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. And I have very distinct, different memories for these books. I remember it was a Christmas morning, and I'm sitting there. I'm probably 10 or 11 years old. This is The Hobbit, by the way. And I get a mass market paperback copy of The Hobbit. I'll put the picture of the cover up over here. I read this book until it fell apart. I've had since like 2 or 3 more different editions of The Hobbit, and it's just a book that's always going to be in my collection. But this god-awful cover was my very first edition of The Hobbit, and for that reason, I think this cover is gorgeous. You can fight me in the comments down below, if you're so inclined. But I remember unwrapping this mass market paperback and seeing this edition of The Hobbit. And I don't think at this time I knew what The Lord of the Rings was, and I kind of turned to my mom and my dad, and they were all just like, don't worry, we know you, we think you're going to really like this. And I was like, okay. And then I remember I went to my room immediately after gift unwrapping, and I just kind of sat down in front of my little kind of waist-height bookshelf, and I sat on the floor at the foot of my bed and just started reading The Hobbit. And from there, I was swept away and taken on a journey by Bilbo. I've got similar memories, which I've told many times on the channel, about The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. I was in middle school, and I think 6th grade, maybe 7th, no, we're going to say 6th grade. And I stopped at my locker, or at my buddy's locker, actually, because he used to sell gum out of his locker. He was one of those guys, but he was also a voracious reader. We used to have, like, forced reading time, and he'd always be sitting there in 6th grade with a copy of it, this mass market paperback brick. Anyway, so I would go over there, and I would talk books with him. And out of his locker falls The Eye of the World. And I have many memories of Eye of the World. But I reach down and I pick it up. And I'm just like, oh, what's this? He's like, oh, that's a really cool fantasy series. It's actually really epic in scope. Do you want to borrow it? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And then I remember borrowing it, reading it, and then going to my mom and bugging her to take me to Borders Bookstore, where I got a collection of the first 3 in mass market paperback. And she bought that for me, and I took it home, and the rest is history. I've been reading The Wheel of Time ever since. Fantastic memories of The Wheel of Time. It's so formative, and it means so much. I have these distinct memories of it. I've also got this one right here. We're jumping into the physical copies. This is Threadlight by Zach Argyle. And essentially, I think this is the first series in which I knew what self-pub was. Like, I kind of knew that indie was a thing, and I had read some indie books, but I didn't know what that was. I didn't know there was a whole subcategory. I didn't know that there was all of these books that weren't trad published out there to explore. And Zach Argyle's was, I think, the first one. And I remember the first time I started reading it because I was buying a car. I'm sitting there in a car dealership. We've gotten this great deal on a car. And I think it was my wife's car. Was it my wife's car? No, it would have been my car. It'd been my car. We've gone in. We've gotten this great deal on this car. They hadn't cleaned the car yet. And so, like, they just gotten it on the lot. They hadn't serviced it. They hadn't cleaned it. Anything like that. It was a trade-in. And we came in and we jumped on it. And they were like, hey, cool. Like, we'll sell you the car. You've just got to wait in our waiting room while we kind of do a quick service on it, get it cleaned up so we can then, in good conscience, give you this car that we just took on the lot like 24 hours prior. I was like, fine, what's that going to take? Like an hour or two? They're like, yeah, sure. It was like 6 hours. My wife was mad. Anyway, I only had my phone with me, and I had downloaded Voice of War on my phone. And I was just like, I don't really know what I'm going to do. And I just started scrolling. And then before I knew it, I was 10% in. And then finally my car was ready and I can move on. And I've just been a huge fan of Zach Argyle's Threadlight ever since. And it kind of helped me discover this whole world of indie books. And for that reason, I will always be grateful for Threadlight. But also, I mentioned that I had read indie before. I just didn't know that it was indie. And that's this right here. This is Superpowers by Drew Hayes. I've talked about this series quite a lot on my channel. And essentially, I started a job many years ago, and I found out that my manager was a reader. And he read indie, and he didn't really tell me like, hey, this is all indie self-pub stuff. He was just like, this is the stuff I read, and judging by what you talk about, I think you would like to read it as well. And the first series he ever recommended to me was Superpowers. And I was kind of hesitant, but I dived in, and I fell in love with all of Drew Hayes' books. I fell in love with Drew Hayes' works, and we formed this great friendship, me and this manager. We still occasionally talk, even though we don't work together anymore. I don't work for him, and I've since moved on. But I mean, I worked for him for 7 years because he was such an amazing manager, and we would just all day talk about books. It was fantastic, and for that reason, this series will always be special to me. We actually got like another coworker to read the series with us so we could talk about it. There was like just 3 of us, and we would just sit there and talk about Drew Hayes' works. It was fantastic. Anyway, moving right along, we've got this next series. And this one is The Dragon Bone Chair by Tad Williams. And the reason this is special to me is after my mom passed in 2012, I was a very young adult, and I was looking for somebody to kind of like connect to in my family, looking for an additional parental figure. And I'd always thought my uncle was really cool growing up. And then after my mom passed, a couple years went by, and all of a sudden we reconnected. Me and my uncle did. He sadly passed in 2016. So 4 years after. But we got really close and really tight for a couple of years. And I knew he liked to read. He was very intelligent. We were big into like going to beer breweries and stuff like that, and we would just talk. And some of the stuff we talked about was books. And the last series that I ever recommended to him and that I like gifted to him to read, because I had mass market paperback editions of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And so the last series that he ever read before his passing was Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And I don't have those copies anymore. I think they got damaged or something, or they got lost. But I've been replacing them with fine press editions. I kind of still also want to get the broken binding editions, just because he was such a great man. And I had such a fantastic relationship with him that when he passed, it was just like ripping out a piece of myself. And yeah, it was a really hard experience. But for that reason, this series, which was the last series we ever read together, will always be incredibly special to me. So yeah, I do plan on eventually getting the broken binding editions as well. If you have a set that you don't want, please feel free to DM me, message me somehow. Let's see if we can't work out a deal, because I would love to have that in my collection, just because it reminds me of my uncle. So yeah. Trying not to cry. Still hurts. And then finally, we've of course got The Shining right here. And The Shining is special to me because I read Stephen King in high school, and I liked King, but like I'd kind of bounced off of him, and I wasn't like prepared to dive on into his full backlog. I've also told this story here on the channel before. And essentially, I remember it was this tiny little school library. It was just 4 walls. So it was a single room, 4 walls, maybe the size of a standard bedroom, like maybe a little bigger than a standard bedroom. I think the ceiling was like maybe 15 feet, and it was like a 15 by 12 foot room. That was the school library. I went to a community college before I went on to higher education and stuff like that. And I remember I was between classes one day, and I walk in there, and I just see a edition of The Shining right there on the shelf. It's old, it's book club, it's battered, and I'm looking at this going, you know what? I read some Stephen King back in the day. Why not? And so I remember checking this out, and then I started reading The Shining. And I would just wander around with the book open in front of me. And I remember distinct scenes from The Shining and just being blown away and feeling like I discovered something incredibly special. It honestly sparked my entire love of diving back into Stephen King. I now have an entire Stephen King collection, and I have read over 40 of King's books. Granted, he's got 80. I'm only halfway through the backlog. Don't judge me. But while this may not be my favorite King, it is the one that brought me back to King. And for that reason, this will always have a very special place on my bookshelf. I love this book. Now, these are the books that are incredibly special to me personally. I want to know the list of books that are incredibly special to you. If you feel like sharing the story of why these books that you list in the comments down below are special to you, I would love to hear your stories so that we can just get a good discussion going and get to know each other a little bit better. But that's all I've really got for today, guys. I hope you are doing well. Till next time, peace out. Stay magical. Bye. And as always, I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons. Thank you for supporting my passion and my hobby. It means the world to me.